Welcome back to Playgrounding. This is Kara Stewart-Fortier. This week, we're going to be talking with artist Scott Froschaur. And Scott lives at the Brewery Arts Complex here in Los Angeles, which is where I also happen to live. And if there's one thing that I learned from this episode is that I really need to get to know my neighbors better. I was just stunned going through this conversation with him. So many amazing twists and turns, so many things that I learned about him. I think you're really going to enjoy it. And our conversation really needed to be this week. It had to be back to back with the Global Play Brigade episode, because we also, in this episode, will be talking about play and activism. Now, last week, we talked about play and improv. Well, play as improv and activism. And with Scott this week, we're going to talk about art. Playful art, which also has a lot in common with improv. He does experiential art. So instead of describe it here, I'm going to just let him do that in just a few minutes. But let me just tell you, this conversation is amazing. We start off talking about compassion and empathy. Then we move on to politics and street art and Burning Man and Cacophony Society. And oh my gosh, my head was spinning in a good way. Anyway, your turn. Meet Scott. First of all, you have a very unique kind of art that you make. And I have to tell you, your bio makes it really hard to interview you on a podcast, because apparently your background consists of a structured education in engineering, theoretical linguistics, science, art, computer programming, and business, along with practical experience in fabrication, design, non-ordinary reality, experiential narrative, venture capital, counterfeiting, and breathing. Now that is my favorite mouthful of words I think I've ever said at once.
It's a lot. There's a tricky word in there, which is experiential narrative. It's not experimental narrative. Experiential narrative. So there's even there's some little trip ups in there too.
I love it. Well, so beyond that beginning of your bio, tell me a little bit about you and your work and just.
Well, but a lot of my work is about empathy and compassion. I think a lot of the artwork that people know me for now is my public art installations of street signs. Mm-hmm. I fabricate street signs to Department of Transportation spec, but I replace the traditionally narrative of negativity with positive affirmations and explorations in self-empathy mostly. Mm-hmm. So like a normal street sign would say no left turn or wrong way, all these negative sorts of things. I thought about, well, what happens if we replace that with positive language? Because we're so inundated by that, mm-hmm. right? Yeah. We're inundated, it kind of starts with this idea of street art being a counterpoint to marketing. That marketing is kind of this omnipresent sort of force in our lives that's invisible because it's so consistently present. Like we don't even notice it. It's a constant bombardment. And one of the primary concepts of marketing is this idea of self-alienation. And when I say self-alienation, it's marketing will say to you, you smell, and then say, buy our deodorant. Mm-hmm. But it starts with this notion of you smell, or you're not happy enough, or, informing you of a lack that you have just by your very existence. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of term that as self-alienation. Mm-hmm. So we're surrounded by constant messages of self-alienation, constantly told that we lack something and that these products will fill that void. And so, I was exploring street art as a counterpoint to marketing and thinking about, okay, well, how do we change that story from one of being continuously surrounded with self-alienation with some other sort of concept? And when I was thinking about street signs, I was thinking, well, street signs work at a really subconscious level, right? You could be, before you can drive, you already know what a red octagon means. It means stop. Mm-hmm. You already know that. So it's deeply ingrained that your foot goes to the brake pedal before you actually process that a stop sign says stop. It's reflexive, it's subconscious. So street signs are working on us that same way with this negative language, but at a subconscious level. So they're digging deep behind our conscious minds and, deploying this negativity on us. So I was like, okay, well, let's use the same fonts, same, geometric shapes, use all of these things that are already tied into our subconscious, but instead of delivering a payload of negativity, hijack that and deliver this payload of empathy and, self-awareness or self-soothing, and those sorts of things.
Mm-hmm. And when you're talking about marketing and also street signs, things start to become our inner voice. Like the things we hear the most starts to become our inner voice, and everything is a limit, it's a speed limit, stop, don't go here, that kind of thing. And the marketing voices are the most insidious. And what you've done is literally take all of that and turn it into such a positive inner voice replacement that, kind of reminds you that maybe you're saying those negative things to yourself all the time too.
You're subjected to them constantly.
Yeah.
And I think of the concept of coercion, like a stop sign is coercive, do not enter is, coercive. And so I thought about this concept of the difference between coercion and inspiration. How is one motivated? Or, it came from working on Burning Man art. We'd work on these huge sculptures with people. And when someone came to work on a giant sculpture for Burning Man, they weren't there because they were being coerced.
No,
they were there through inspiration, and watching that process of, what does a group of people produce when they're motivated by inspiration rather than when they're forced to work, to pay their rent or, whatever it is through coercion, there's a different outcome. And so that was part of it too, is this notion of, the street signs are coercive, and how can we turn that into inspiration rather than coercion?
Absolutely. And you just had an installation out there. It was last year, right?
I've had lots of
many years.
Yeah.
Your most recent, I was looking at some pictures.
Sure. Last year would be the most recent. There would be another one this year, if there was one this year.
Yeah, there's none this year. And speaking of that, you have had some really cool responses to the pandemic. I know you have, masks,
sure,
and they have your signs on it, that kind of thing. And you have these BLM stickers or a graphic that you have put on your website for people to use.
Yeah, that's actually, it doesn't predate the Black Lives Matter movement, but it predates the current environment. It was several years ago, and it was around the beginning of the original beginnings of the Black Lives Matter movement, and it's a Black Power fist. It's Malo Chango is another way to say it. And then it takes the typical street sign that would say something like dangerous road ahead or something like that, or left turn ahead. And it says resistance ahead. And so that was, my work is really deeply political, but it's typically deeply political at a subconscious level. I've got this belief that increasing levels of empathy is an inherently political act. So I'm not necessarily usually out there, at least with the street signs, talking about, daily politics. And so that's a piece from years ago that I was actually I wasn't sure whether or not it fit in with all of the other work I was doing. And it got, I displayed it at a couple of different events. But I think there's the tenor has changed. And it's interesting when, things that you might have felt uncomfortable with kind of come to the mainstream. And now all of a sudden it's, it's appropriate to talk about these kinds of things. And it's interesting.
Yeah, it really is. And it's funny that you use this word political. It feels like that word has just become this big negative. I don't want to get political. I don't want to do political. But political is actually, if we could just reframe the word, we can't really get away from it in an interconnected world. And all of those things that are going on the inside, on the subconscious level, and each individual that sees those signs and experiences whatever they experience in that moment of, the cognitive dissonance between what the sign looks like and what the sign says. It really can be I think, political in a good sense. And I wish we could find a way to make language around politics mean something good and interconnected. And I don't know if that will ever happen.
Well, it's funny. So I was thinking about what we were going to talk about.
Uh-huh.
And I was thinking, that the concept of play and the concept of creating space for creativity, mm-hmm. and kind of non-defined space and allowing things to occur. And I was thinking about this notion of kind of a storyteller that would be in a village or in a tribe. These kind of some people would call it a shaman, something like that. And it was this idea of having a dream, and the tribal elders or the village elders or the city elders or whoever they were had to have a vision of a future. And there's a term I think of which is called dream the culture forward. And this idea that, we're kind of in a moment where we feel it's challenging to imagine what a future looks like. We're kind mm-hmm. of all in a really a space that's really challenged to even imagine a future.
Yeah.
And it would be someone like the shaman or a village elder or someone who would then come forward and tell a story. They would be storytellers, and they would tell a story of a future, and it would come from a dream, and it might be through a shamanic process. It might be through, a vision quest. It could be through all these things, but that's how the cultures moved forward, was through this visioning. And to me, it relates to the concept of play. It relates to this, this dreaming, this creativity. But I think what's happened is that's now our political system, and that's our governmental system. We rely on them to dream us forward, out of our present. And I think it's an interesting relationship we're having. So, when we're talking about politics and we're talking about play, mm-hmm. that I think there's an interesting, intersection of, what is the dream for our future, and how do we embrace our dream for the future? How do our leaders, whoever that might be, political or social or whoever they are, how do they dream us forward from this situation? And I think that's related to play. I think that's related to creativity. That's related to intuition, and kind of, non-thought, whatever we want to call that.
Or not productive thought. I mean, productivity and play are kind of the opposites, but
right.
It's funny because it's the hardest thing for us to try to figure out how to do as adults. We need it to be productive. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess the hardest part of who's dreaming for us is that what is the us in their mind? What is we in their minds? And that's the hardest part right now, is to try to make sure we have a government that actually includes everyone. And I spent a little time. The last week's episode is going to be because it's coming out tomorrow and next week after. But the episode is with the Global Play Brigade and the two founders of that, and they talk about how improv kind of teaches the values of being able to say yes and to share a space, to do this active listening with one another, to actually create something new, to create a story. How do you think art can do that kind of thing? I know improv is something a little different, but it's, what do you think of that question?
Well, it's interesting because I enjoy all forms of art. So when it said, mm-hmm. When you read my bio, experiential narrative is like improv. Mm-hmm. So you have narrative, which would be like a written narrative would be a book you'd read, but experiential narrative would be like actually like being at Burning Man. Is like an experiential narrative. You're just walking through space and you're having this experience, and a story is unfolding, as you move through the space. But I think one of the things that that's really important for me that would relate to improv is immediacy. And, immediacy is deeply involved in play. It's all of these things, being present, you talk about being grounded, being in the moment. And that's a core element of my work is about trying to get people to experience that moment. And that can happen, I think of this concept of like a short circuiting. So when someone sees a sign that they think is a stop sign and they get up next to it and they've been convinced it's a stop sign, it's a red octagon and the first two letters are ST, they're convinced. And then maybe they just glance over and realize, oh, it doesn't say stop, it says start. And to me, there's a disconnect that happens there that grounds them in the moment, because there's this word called the quotidian. The quotidian comes from the Situationists and some of the avant-garde artists of the early 20th century. And the quotidian is this notion of, it's the everyday in French. So like le pain quotidien is like our everyday bread. But the idea of the quotidian is, that which, we don't actually even notice or process. So it's, it's that walk to work every day or whatever it is that, we fail to even notice anymore. We just get so ingrained in it that it's kind of nothing. So I've got this, there's this notion that the Situationists had, which was called anti-quotidian or counter-quotidian. And it's to then snap you back and get you out of that haze of the everyday and, ground you back in the immediacy of the moment by a spectacle or by some sort of short circuiting that surprises you. And all of a sudden now you're here and you're like, oh, I'm not normally even here. I'm normally just kind of in a haze moving through my life.
Yeah.
And now oh my God, I'm here in this moment. And that's I think a critical component of my work is that desire for short circuiting and surprise to ground you back into the moment. And so I would say, that's how I would relate that to something like improv, because, to me, improv is about, just being super present.
Yeah.
And just, and it's about, and play is about being super present. And it's about, letting go of the future, letting go of the past. And, I think that's critical to my work. And that's something that, I pursue in all sorts of different kinds of work. I mean, at Burning Man, that's something that you're always pursuing all the time. That's anybody who's making art out there is attempting to kind of short circuit, reality and, bring people into a present moment with, either something so large that it creates awe and they're shocked into it with that, or just that it's so different that they're like, I've never seen that before, or whatever it is. But a lot of it to me has to do with how to generate immediacy, how to create contact with the moment.
Yeah, it's funny. The art out there, my first year that got me the most, the ones that I remembered the most were the smaller, like the phone booth to God, which is the size of a regular old phone booth. And it's just in the middle of a bunch of other things that are around. And you see the phone booth like you used to see phone booths, because you used to see phone booths. And to me, it was one of those things that made me stop for a second and go, wait, hold on, that can't be a real thing, and then I got to have the experience of this silly phone booth. But your signs, are also that for me. And I'm kind of weirdly excited that there's no Burning Man this year, for only one reason, because I really wish I could go, is that hopefully these kinds of things will suddenly leak out into the world and not in an organized fashion. I mean, that would be the dream. But your pieces are out there in the regular old world as well. What kind of locations? I mean, are people able to stumble upon your pieces or?
Oh yeah. So, yeah, and that's again, that's another one of the best parts of it, right?
Yeah.
Is somebody who stumbles on it and doesn't know what they're in for, and see it from a distance, and then get surprised that it's not anything like what they thought. They're all over the country. Obviously, I live in Los Angeles, so there's a high density of them in Southern California, just because that's easy for me, and I have a lot of people who I put them in their front yards and things like that. But also, I get grants from cities. So the city of Glendale, which is right next to LA, has given me several grants to do many. I think at the moment I probably have upwards of about 20 in parks, throughout city of Glendale, libraries and parks and schools and things like that. But so all over Southern California, but they're all over the place. Florida, the Colorado. I just had an opening this weekend, oddly enough, because I didn't go. I actually shipped a bunch of work to Toronto. And there are 20 pieces in a place called the Distillery District in Toronto, which for those of us in Los Angeles who know the brewery, it's reminiscent. It's an old distillery that they've bought and put in art galleries and restaurants and shops. And so it's a similar sort of vibe. It's, to me, it's like the brewery meets the Grove. However, but
that's funny, but also cool.
Yeah. Or somebody could be like, but the other part of that is, I met a guy at Burning Man last year who was installing a sculpture while I was installing my work. And we just got to talking. We exchanged information. And a few months ago, he emailed me. He said, "Hey, so I'm the curator for this Distillery District thing in Toronto. Wow. And I want to put a bunch of your work there." And so I shipped him a bunch of stuff. And then the pictures started coming back on Instagram. And it's like, oh, of course, he knows a bunch of other Burning Man artists. So here's my work next to all of these other pieces that I recognize from Burning Man, epic sculpture, like all of this other stuff in this space. And so that was really inspiring, to see that.
Oh, I love it. I really think there should be more of that out there in the world.
I'm working on it.
Yes. Oh my goodness. So much. I'm coming up on time and I just want to go on and on. But yeah, so I guess this time, since we can't go out and we can't leave the house and that kind of thing, you have made it possible to take little pieces of the work. You have your signs on the masks. I was going to sit down with my husband because as I was going through the shop this week, and there are little pins and you can get smaller versions of the signs themselves. They're really pretty on your website.
The concept is that, when I do a piece of work, I don't see it as kind of an individual piece of artwork. I kind of see it as part of a larger system. And so if someone is interested in the message that's in one of the signs, you might not have the ability to have one of them in your front yard or something like that, but I try and create a whole spectrum of possibilities. And so, at the smallest level, I do stickers, and the stickers are really high quality, and I've got them on my car, and that's a fun way to start. And then, the pins and necklaces and things like that, and then t-shirts and, masks and the smaller signs and all that kind of stuff. But the idea is that it's this, to me, the message is, the whole point. And that's why I do it. That's why I put them up in public. And that's why, I did them up as street art illegally, for a while. Cool. The first ones I did were completely illegal.
You weren't one of those, you weren't the guy who put up the 5 freeway sign, are you?
He's a little older than us.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, I mean, he's obviously someone who I look up to, that he did amazing work. My first works were all illegal. I started out doing stickers of the signs, and then I was like, oh, what if I could actually just make the signs? And so I make them to the Department of Transportation spec. And that was my whole thing, was if I put it up, maybe people won't even notice it. And so I put one up at the corner of 4th and Beaudry in downtown LA, and it lived there for probably 6 or 8 months before it disappeared. And I don't know if if street services took it down or whoever, but that's how it all started. Was I just wanted the message to occur. I just wanted, to get that out there. And so now it's like, okay, now I can get cities to pay me for it. Now I can actually do it as a job. Yeah. And continue forward, making money with it, so that then, I can give them out to people. I put them in front of churches or whatever. And, and as I say to them, it's like, there are organizations that have money that I get money from. And then there are other organizations or individuals who don't have any money, who that's the whole point, is that I can, take from this section to kind of fuel this other section.
Awesome. Yeah, I really like, because the experience is still jarring, even if you're looking at it on a small pin or a necklace, because you still see like the one love one is what I want. But it, you see it looks like a one-way sign until you read it. And it's really powerful, really powerful.
So that one, I don't know how close we are to finishing, but that one is, I just got a contract with City of West Hollywood.
Oh.
I'm doing that One Love, which is the rainbow One Love, in neon in the center median of Santa Monica Boulevard in West Hollywood.
Oh, wow.
And so that one, yeah, I know. And it's oversized.
Awesome.
It's this gigantic, it's like 9 feet high and 3 feet wide, and it's pointing up, and the love part blinks like a motel thing because it's all in neon. And then I have another one that says, "Relax, you are okay." It looks like the 101 freeway sign. And so that one's going to be 6 feet high and 4 feet wide and made of neon, and it rotates. It's like this slow rotation
my goodness.
And they're going in the median of Santa Monica Boulevard. So, that's the idea, is just getting the message out. Where can I get it? Where can I, who'll give me the space? When you're a street artist, you just put it wherever.
Take it.
Yeah, you just take it.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting, concept of like moving to asking. But when you ask, it lasts longer.
Yeah, exactly.
That's part of the thing I love.
And then it gets to, Are you going to be doing any more subversive kind of work before the end of this summer for your Burning Man fun? Or should we not know about it?
Yeah, well, it's funny because, Burning Man art has become, with the show at the Smithsonian, and I was fortunate enough to have some pieces in this show at the Smithsonian, and then that show traveled to several other museums, Cincinnati and Oakland, and there's and then just the I was at a festival. I had some pieces in a festival in Las Vegas this past year, and there's a bunch of Burning Man art. You just start going around, and there's just Burning Man art all over the place. Yeah, and it as public art. So, there is this subversion that's happening kind of from the inside, which I think it's obviously there's a tension there between becoming, part of the system and still remaining, outside of the system. But I think that there's something, something amazing about Burning Man art, becoming, part of the system, becoming public art, this transition, but, I think of the transition: street art, Burning Man art, public art. And street art and public art are kind of in tension with each other, right? Because public art is sanctioned, street art is unsanctioned. And so street art has the capacity to say things that public art can't say, but public art has the capacity to, for longevity and to be, protected and just all these other things. And so then Burning Man kind of occupies this central space between the two, where it is, Black Rock City is, it's as a street artist, I think about Black Rock City as what would the ideal city look like that actually supported street art. So if you wanted to go, spray paint on a billboard in Los Angeles, you'd have to do it clandestinely. You'd have to, it would have to be all cloak and dagger and whatever, and make that happen. If you get caught, you could get arrested and all those sorts of things. Burning Man gives you cranes. It's a city designed to support that, whatever that crazy vision is. Yes. And so it's almost, Burning Man's almost a city that's designed as this meeting point between public art and street art. That street art being, irreverent, it can be, anything it wants to be, but public art being supported by the community. Well, Burning Man is that irreverence supported by the community. And so this thought process of the transition, using Burning Man as kind of a gateway from street art through Burning Man into public art, that it's kind of and it's, they have people at Burning Man that have, they can wear a suit and tie or whatever, and can, be all professional, and then they can totally, slither in and get in there and, again, I think of delivering payloads. They can deliver the payload of the street art concept into the public art milieu. So to me, it's a year round. Black Rock City is an amazing event, but I participate. There's a thing called the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and I've been lucky enough to be a representative from Burning Man at the U.S. Conference of Mayors for the past couple of years.
Oh my goodness!
And it's amazing to see. Burning Man has this this level of involvement, engagement that there's no other city on the planet that can rival the level of engagement at Burning Man, because Burning Man's just built the way it's built. Yeah. So when you see a mayor from some town in Ohio that's at the Conference of Mayors listening to us talk about participation and talk about engagement, and then they oh, I want to know more, and then we bring them out to the playa. And we get to take them on a tour, and they get to see the infrastructure, and they get to see how we build this city, which boggles their minds, right? It boggles anybody's mind.
Oh, of course,
but you take a mayor who's used to having to, and they go, you 80,000 people, and you're running it like this, and you've got the Rangers. We introduce them to the concept of the Rangers. We introduce them to all of the systems, the radio station, the airport, all the porta potties. It's mind-boggling.
It is. It really is.
And you display that, and then I well up just thinking about it. I get to lead them on an art tour, and at night, because for those who don't know, the greatest moment in any Burning Man experience is taking a virgin, someone who's never been to Burning Man before, on their first night on the playa, and they've been in the city before, but they've never actually seen what the city looks like at night. And you cross the Esplanade, which is Main Street, and you cross out into the open playa for the first time with a virgin at night, and their minds melt, because it's incomprehensible. So I'm there with 50 mayors, and these are mayors who have spent the day seeing all this stuff. And then we get to ride on an art car, and we come out of the city into the playa, and they see the expanse of Burning Man, and they glaze over, and they just have no system of comprehension. And then we get to take them to the temple, and we get to express to them what civic structures can look like that are developed for the expression of grief. Because our cities have no civic structures. That has to be relegated to things like church, and there are structures for that. But that a city,
but that are all inclusive.
It's all inclusive. It's a civic structure just for the expression of grief. And you take them there, and they've never seen anything like it. And they're mayors, and they go, I need this in my city. I don't understand how you made all this happen, but I need this in my city. And so this idea of, for me, Burning Man's 365, it's this thing that is no longer just relegated to the Black Rock City experience. It's something that has, it's broken and scattered, and it's insinuating its way in, across the planet in all of these different levels, right? From, burners who go, to their hometown and do something goofy and open up a coffee shop, or, or a bike rental, or who knows what, or some fantastic thing in there. But then and then they might run for city council at some point.
Yep. Yeah.
And now they're doing this. And then, so it's like, it's engaging it at so many levels. And I don't,
No, it's important.
It's amazing.
No, it's important to conversation, especially when it comes to Burning Man. I was an RC for a little while, and kind of went through a lot of hoops to get there and all this stuff. But then when I kind of realized, plus it was a time of great transition for me, so I didn't. I decided to step down. But what I really wish there was more of is that there's kind of an allocation of, we're going to do this many events, we do these things. There's kind of already of a set thing, and it's having these amazing events, like amazing equinox, the decompression, all the things that we do. But I just desperately wanted to try and see what's out there on the subversive side of things, on the a little bit outside of the norm. I loved Derek and Vanessa, this couple of friend of ours. They do this thing called the Hippos. They've done it. They did it. It started as sort of just a experimental piece that people would walk into this little place that looked like an office, looked like a waiting room, just to see how long people would wait. Things like that. Those are the things I kind of wish were out in the streets. Like when I see your signs, like those are some of the things I'd like them to be experiential. I'd like them to have a little more of that improv thing. Of course, the hippos went to
Coachella,
the word that somehow I couldn't remember. But like I love that kind of thing. And I kind of wished that there would be even just like costume trash pickups or just things, anything. I don't know. I just keep thinking, what more could we do? And
to me, that's Cacophony Society.
Yes, I got in touch with that all the way too late.
Oh, come on! I'm a member of LA Cacophony Society.
You are?
And sure. So there's SantaCon, which is the most obvious, highest profile thing. But there are tons of other events. We did a thing years ago called the Night Market, and the Night Market. I went. Oh, okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So that was a Cacophony Society. We invited them down and kind of gave them the structure for that.
Okay.
But so that to me, that's a perfect example. The Night Market was a perfect example of things Cacophony Society, still does. But it's funny because I think, when I hear it, again, I think of two layers, right? Because I'm a member of LA Cacophony Society and I'm an elected official on my LA City Council Neighborhood Council.
Love it.
And there's nothing more subversive than becoming part of the governing body, understanding their systems, right? Because it's the same, making public art. So much of it is like knowing the permits.
Yep.
And knowing the, engineering and all of these things that are, that are really foreign. If you don't know this stuff, there's no way you can make public artwork if you can't, or hire somebody to navigate the bureaucracy of engineering and permits. There are these two, black holes for people that they're horrified by. Yeah. And that's the street signs I invented specifically for that, because the street signs, since they're built to Department of Transportation spec, that means that the engineering is already on file for them. So if we're going to build a giant duck in the middle of Griffith Park, it's going to be bogged down for years, making sure it's not going to fall over, or a kid's not going to walk up and put their hand on it, get a splinter. Like there's all of these things. But if I make a street sign that's to Department of Transportation spec, they already know it's not going to fall over. Yeah. They already know it's not going to rust. They already know all that stuff. So it totally sidelines all of the, permit and engineering process. But that puts you on the inside. Yeah. You get on the inside of the system and you start working with their rules, and their rules are there for a reason, and if they need to be changed, you need to be on the inside to change them anyway. But I think I'm a strong believer in both. I'm a strong believer in cacophony and government. Yes. And being on both sides. Yes. And how can we build on this? And wow. Oh my goodness. This conversation went all kinds of amazing places that I did not expect. I haven't actually had a chance to sit down and talk with you yet. Like I've always just kind of met you here and there and been like, I need to hang out with that guy. And then it never happened. Well, we met at Coachella. We met at Coachella. That's right. That's right. We met with James Peterson on James Peterson's piece. Yes. That's right. The Cryochrome. That's yes. The hippos weren't there that year. Yeah. They were there that year or the next year. I can't remember. The next year. Oh my goodness. That's so funny. Because I always would just see you and be like, yes, I know you, but I don't really know you. So I'm really, really excited that, we did it in this kind of public kind of way. But hopefully we'll get to do it over a beer at Barbara's. I love it. I would love that so much. Wow. Awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me. It was really fun. Good. I'm glad. That's the way it's supposed to be. Thank you so much for listening. Next week, we will be talking with Andrew Walsh, the Playbrarian. He got his name teaching adults to play, which is not easy. During lockdown, he got bored. So what does a Playbrarian do when he gets bored? He found a bunch of old fairy tales and folk tales from Lancashire, and he put them into a book that will be coming out in September, and you will hear about all of his exploits. Very exciting. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and review if you would like to. Make sure that Playgrounding is accessible to all of those other playgroundlings out there who need to find us. Thanks a lot. I'll see you next week.